A $5 bet at the Venetian yields a player $2 million in winnings. This is the focus group.
They're all business, except when they're not. It's the Focus Group with Tim Bennett and John Nash.
Welcome to the Focus Group. John Nash here with my good friend and co-host Tim Bennett. FocusGroupRadio.com is our website. You'll learn all about us there, including our partners, Deep Discount. We're glad that they are with us. And you'll learn about our companion podcast, TFG Unbuttoned. If you're an audio listener, it pops into your stream of choice on Tuesdays. This show drops on Wednesdays as video, and it drops into your audio feed on Saturday. Most of our listeners, I believe, are Saturday folks that go all the way back to the days of Sirius satellite radio. Tim, I was just actually looking through some pictures of the past, and I was looking at some of our guest photos, some of the fishbowl shows, and we had a really great studio there, didn't we?
We're at Sirius XM. Yeah. It's funny. I was looking at some too. You know what I found? I found the picture of the bare naked chef.
Yes.
Remember him? Now, did you know he was a huge Trumper?
No, I did not. No.
I didn't either.
Well,
I'll leave it at that.
Tim, what did we learn from the Preppy Handbook? TNAFT. There's no accounting for taste.
Yeah. No, I laughed. He had popped up on, he's kind of had this resurgence. I guess he popped up somewhere on social media. I said, oh, he was on the show. And then I started reading the feed, and I thought, whoa, okay. There you go.
That's a head scratch, huh?
Yeah, another self-hating gay. But, so yeah.
I shared with you earlier in the week something I found online that just made me laugh out loud. It was a clip from a baseball game, and two outfielders are going for the same catch, and they collide, but they collide by like interlocking their legs, and I guess you'd call it scissoring. And to show you how the work that we did for Subaru many years ago still resonates, the caption says, "They scissored so hard they went out and bought a Subaru after the game." So it still rolls on to this day, Mr. Bennett.
I had a friend of mine ask me, I guess scissoring kind of, was it Derek and Romaine or Frank DeCaro that did the scissoring? They used to talk about it. It might have been Frank. But I had a friend of mine, she kept asking me about it, and I was trying to explain it to her, like, scissoring. I was trying to, if you're watching the... Yeah. She didn't quite understand what scissoring was. I said, I don't think you and your husband are doing it. So then she kind of caught on. But
here's another little thing that I found. I love these little grammar things. It was a photo of a newspaper article, and it was under a subhead called Mentoring Day, and it says, "Students get first-hand job experience." And the caption reads, "Do hyphens matter?" Yes. So if you put the hyphen at, like, students get first hand job experience. So I like little, like, those are totally innocent things that pop up. Like, oh, let's do this, let's do that.
Yeah, well, yeah. Now there's lots of those. Who was it? Jay Leno used to do all those things with the headlines that were always messed up.
Ripped from the headlines, or right, signs that were, yeah.
Or particularly weddings, too, when there was a wedding party. We had when I was at Subaru, there was a couple getting married. They worked together at an agency. And her maiden name, I never thought about it, but Peter Cook, how smart he is. So his last name was Tag, and her name was Price, and they were getting married. And so he very deadpanned at lunch says, Are you gonna combine your names? You're gonna do your... And they both sat there, because it would have been Price Tag. And they hadn't even thought of it. And I'm sitting there thinking that I thought, oh, Peter, you kind of ruined their whole day. Are you going to take each other's names? Tom Price Tag.
The hyphenation.
So, yeah.
I like that. So any other things to report? I mean, we talked about it on TFG Unbuttoned. We've been enjoying the Olympics. I always do enjoy the Olympics. Question for you. During the opening ceremony, when they lit the torch, they put it up in a balloon, which was, I think, a nod to the Montgolfier brothers, who were the French brothers who were the first people to float a hot air balloon. We noticed that during the day, the balloon's not up in the air, though. Do you think that's only at nighttime that they raise it?
I don't know. I was wondering. I didn't notice it wasn't. It's not up during the day.
When we were watching some of the cycling and other events over the weekend, they would showcase
Right.
they would show the area, and it looked like the balloon was close to the ground or on the ground. I mean, the torch was still lit. The Olympic flame was going, but maybe they only raise it at night or something.
I didn't understand that Quaker doll with the faceless Quaker doll running with the torch during the opening ceremonies. Where was he? What was it? Was it supposed to be a mythical character or something?
Oh, you mean that whole thing where there was the real life guy and the video guy, and it was like the hood thing, right?
Right.
The,
You had no
the
face.
Quaker, the
Quaker.
Quaker.
The Quakers don't have any faces on their dolls.
No, I didn't know that. This is new.
Yeah.
Wait, let's stop at the Quaker doll thing. They don't have faces?
No, they don't idolize anything. So there's no faces. So if you see a Quaker kid with a toy or a doll, it's got no face.
Don't you think that's a bit odd?
Well, it's kind of like different religions that don't want their picture taken.
All right.
You can't have your
Okay.
picture taken, right?
I'll take it, but still, we grew up with faces on dolls. I mean, that was
Well,
a
you
big
would
thing,
think.
right?
Yes, yes.
So you have some other thoughts on the opening ceremony and the Quaker guy running around with the torch and
Quaker. I thought it was one big Cirque du Soleil display, but other than that, I thought the boat show was a bit.
Bob
That's
was
a
a
nice
bit
idea.
disappointed with that.
I want to see them march in. I want to see the
Yeah.
outfits, and I want to critique the uniforms. Now, the United States went all out this year with jeans. They were wearing jeans. You couldn't tell because of the rain; they had ponchos on. But Ralph Lauren did the outfits this year, and they did blue blazers and jeans. I'd like to see them walk in because we always have the biggest team.
Huge. Well, the Soviets also fueled a pretty, and don't the Chinese have like we're all sort of in that huge.
Chinese
team
have a big team, but we had the largest team again. The Russians aren't there; they were kicked out. Them in Belarus.
Wait
They're
a minute.
athletes.
I guess I didn't realize that. Serious? Yeah. Okay, makes sense.
Because of
Yeah.
Ukraine /doping. But and some of the Chinese were kicked out for doping as well. So the Russians weren't there. They can compete. Some of the athletes can compete under the
Different flag.
federated states
Yeah.
or something. It's like a turquoise flag or something. I don't know. It's like they had to apologize. They mislabeled the South Korean team the North Korean team. You got to wonder. I was watching the North Korean boat go by. I think you said it had Portugal on it and Qatar or something. And I'm thinking, if you were one of those North Korean athletes and you're going down the Seine and seeing all this going on, I'd be like, I'm not going back to Pyongyang. I mean, it's like,
Where can I get off?
right. Wouldn't you? I'd defect. Defect.
Where's the closest embassy?
You can get a baguette and some brie. You're not getting that in Pyongyang on the streets.
Certainly not. I told Tim that I sent him a meme that I saw. You had to have seen the opening ceremonies, and you had to be a Star Wars fan to get it. But it showed a picture of a bunch of Empire officers walking down a corridor with Darth Vader at the head of the line, and in the mix was a big bird, and it just said Portugal on the boat with Qatar and North Korea. And I processed it, and I couldn't stop laughing. And I showed it to Bob; he just couldn't stop laughing because Portugal's big bird, the Empire soldiers are obviously Qatar, and then North Korea is Darth Vader. Somebody comment on it, like people don't. It can't be a joke, right? Like all the comments were like, "I don't think you should say this about Qatar or Qatar because da 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 da," and someone else is like, "Just laugh and move on."
And everyone's lost their sense of humor. You're not allowed to do anything. You can't say anything. You can't report anything. You can't laugh.
No.
Everybody gets triggered.
Yeah, very easily these days, quite easily.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Bennett, without further ado, what caught your eye?
What caught your eye? Here's what Tim and John found.
So this is a bit of a sad story. The headline is Delaware funeral home cremated the wrong body, and then the funeral home tried to pass it off to another family, or pass off another body to the family. So this was Wilmington, Delaware. There's a lawsuit that had just been filed. So the family, a guy named Roland Johnson Sr., he'd worked for a number of years, over 30 years at DuPont, and died at age 93. And his wishes and the family's wishes were there would be a open casket and a viewing, and then he would be buried with his wife in the local cemetery. And so his daughter, family member, they had brought down a black suit for him to wear and then changed their mind and wanted a different suit put on him. So the day before the actual funeral, or the viewing and then the funeral, the family had gathered to go down and see the body and see how it was, prepared as people do. And they looked in the casket, and she realized the initial suit that she brought was not the suit that this guy had on that was in the casket. So she said, this is not the black suit. She said it was a blue suit that this guy was wearing. So they're like, no, that's black. It's just the way the lighting is. And she said, well, that's not my husband. Or that's not my father. He looks different. No, that's him. When we embalm people, sometimes embalming will change people's appearance.
Wow. Okay.
And so she's like, no. So she started asking questions, and he had a very identifiable tattoo, I guess, on his arm, and they wouldn't let her look at the body. So she got very upset, and she ran out, and the other family members got upset, and they left. And the funeral home wanted to go through with the ceremony the next day. So they kept calling and asking different questions about the body and the preparation and so forth. And the person that was in the casket, they went onto the funeral home's website and saw that this man had died previously. The same picture of this guy that they saw in the casket. So they go back down to the funeral home, and she said that they asked questions again. They let them look for the tattoo. She said, if there is not a tattoo of an eagle on his arm, then I know that that's not my father, because they kept insisting it was him. So, of course, they looked. And then finally, she said the owner's daughter of the funeral home, they came clean and said, no, this isn't your father. So they were trying to pass off another body as the father. That they had accidentally cremated him. And so they thought they would just substitute this other body for the viewing and the funeral. And so, of course, now it's turned into to a lawsuit. But what a sad thing, I thought, because it's enough trauma to all the emotion that goes around the death of a loved one. But then to show up at the funeral home and say, that's not my father, or that's not my grandfather, that's not my uncle, whatever. Oh, no, that's him. That's him. People change when they get embalmed. And to know, your loved one, right? And to say, well, that's not even the suit we brought down for him to wear.
Yeah.
He has the wrong suit on. And I guess they were going to try to pass it off and bury him with the other guy.
The wrong body was
cremated.
Literally put for showing.
Right. So they took another person that was, so they accidentally cremated the guy that was supposed to have the viewing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so they took another African-American guy and just put him in his place and said, oh, here he is. So they're like, that's not him.
Now, Tim, you and I have both been to viewings. I don't care how far along something is, they're recognizable.
Yeah.
When you approach the casket and you kneel down or you say your goodbyes, you know who you're looking at, right?
Right. The only thing and this is a funny one, but I thought of this. Our friend Jeff, who we've worked with, his grandmother had died, and they gave the funeral home a photograph of her to make her up how they wanted her, because she was very particular about her hair and her makeup and so forth. And so Jeff said they arrived at the funeral home and they all looked in the casket right before everybody was to come in, and they're like, "Oh my God, that's not Grandma." And they couldn't. And then they looked and they're like, "No, it is her, but she has big, bright blue eyeshadow on. She was all made up with this different hair." And so the mother says "What picture did you give the funeral home?" And they gave a picture of the grandmother with one of her friends, which was dressed with all this gaudy hair and eye makeup or whatever. And so they made it look like the friend instead of the grandmother. So Jeff says his mother's there with a towel trying to wipe the makeup off the body, the eyes. He says she would never wear that blue eyeshadow. They're trying to get all the makeup off before people start coming in.
They really made her look like the friend instead of the...
Yes, and the friend, and as Jeff says, it was like Mimi on the Drew Carey show. It was just like it was her best friend who was just this total over the top, all painted up all the time. And his grandmother was just very, understated. So when they looked in there and saw this huge blue eyeshadow and hair all teased up and everything, they're like, well, that's her, but that's not her. And Jeff said it ended up being a moment of laughter of them all up there trying to get her, to push her hair down, comb her hair out, fix her eyes, rub the rouge off, get rid of the bright red lipstick.
Well, it's the one time you could ever say like a viewing would lead to merriment, right? Like, oh my God.
But this other thing with the family is it's a horrible
horrible
thing. Yeah.
And it's an important thing. I remember the last viewing I actually went to was a porter in our old building passed away, Luis. And I walked in, and I had to stifle a laugh because behind him on a big blow-up poster was a picture of I think it was Al Pacino in the movie Scarface, where he wears like a white suit and a red tie, and Luis was in the coffin with a white suit and a red tie. And I'm smiling as I approach it, and his sister or his mother came over, and I said, I'm in the bill. I knew Luis for years. He used to take me up on the freight elevator when I came back from biking, and I talked about he had a lot of hobbies. He would make these models and paint these elaborate statues and things. And I said, I apologize for smiling. And she goes, no, that was his intent. He wanted, when his last wishes, he wanted to go out like Scarface. And so when that happens, just change the whole thing. But my God, that's not a cool thing to swap the body, right?
No. It was, and I don't know in a case like that what the charge. I have no idea how a court or a jury will put a value on that.
All sorts of laws get broken, and there's going to be stiff penalties. Now, what caught my eye this week could not be any different. I teased it at the start. It's one of these things you just wish would happen to any of us, right? Basically, though, a guy's at the Venetian Hotel and out in Vegas, and he puts a $5 bet down on a game that I had to look up here. So it's poker. I'll just get to the point, though. So basically what happened is a $5 side bet turns into $2,469, so over $2 million bucks. A very lucky guest was dealt a 7-card straight flush while playing the game is called Face Up Pai Gow. This is the largest Pai Gow progressive paid out in the resort's history. Who's feeling lucky? So if you happen to be watching the video, there's a picture of this flush on the table, and it starts at the left with a 7, then there's a joker, then there's a 9, 10, jack, queen, king, and they're all spades, which is amazing. And the joker in this particular game is allowed to be a wild card, so that stood in for the 8. So I went online and I looked up what Pai Gow actually is. And it's a game played with a standard 52-card deck plus a single joker. It is played on the table set for 6 players plus the dealer. Each player attempts to defeat the banker, who may be the casino dealer, one of the other players of the table, or a player acting in tandem with the dealer. But basically, Pai Gow is a card game version of a Chinese domino game. So somehow, and the rules are rather complex, but this particular hand is so rarely dealt that I think that the article said it was 44,000. The odds were something like 44,000, to 1 that you would do this. So $5 yielded 2.2 million. Wow. And again, I don't know anything about this, so I hope for those that do play cards, I'm not doing such a butchery job here. But I would never even know how to find a table like this where they're doing face up Pai Gow. You know what I'm getting at?
Nor I figure out how to play, right? I wouldn't even know how to play. How much do you tip the dealer? Aren't you supposed to tip them if you win or you do well? I wonder.
That's such a great question. That never comes up in these articles, but I think you hand them some chips.
I think if you won $2 million,
I would give a couple hundred in chips to the dealer, right?
I don't know.
Would you go higher?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if you give them 10,000. I mean, what do you give them? I don't know. That's a good question.
Okay, so it's two things. They're doing their job. The cards are, you know how they shuffle them they have those special machines that shuffle the cards and they bring them out. So the dealer is just sort of your conduit to fortune, I suppose. Right. I would do a couple $100 for sure. I don't even know how how does that even get? Are they supposed to report that if you tip something to someone like?
Yes, it's a tip. You got to claim your tips.
Got to report.
Or is it 10-15%? I don't know. Is it like a 15-20% like you would at a restaurant?
That's
Probably
it. Great.
Not.
Tim, it's it's an interesting question. It's sort of an etiquette question, right?
Yeah.
What's the proper etiquette when you leave the table? Like, there's no way on God's green earth I would have done nothing but scoop up the chips and walk to the cashier, right? I would have. I'm off. Thank you. I would have left that casino so quickly, right?
Oh, yeah. And
in cases like this, in case you're wondering, when the cashier's booth gives you your winnings, They also give you the tax form that goes with it because they automatically transmit that data to the IRS. So it's a winnings. So I think it's 45 or almost 50% of those winnings are going to be taxable, right?
Wow.
But you're going to end up with 1.1 million in cash.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I got to win the lottery. I keep thinking I'm going to win the lottery. I got to hit.
Oh God, you're like me. Last night I was kind of drowsy on the couch. We finished the Olympics or watching. I always watch up to the weather then. And the news, I'm just going to say a sidebar here. The news is really not the news anymore. You know, the news to me is there was an earthquake in this part of the world. This is happening over here. You know, it's we were watching this story on the local news and it was like more of a lifestyle thing. I'm like, this is not really news. But anyway, I was starting to drift off and I thought, wouldn't it be great if I had a dream tonight and all the numbers came to me for Powerball?
Hey, well, whatever happened to your Star Wars cards? Are you still working on that?
Yeah. So I figured out a way to photograph the key cards and the stickers, the ones that I've seen most frequently.
What do you have to photograph them for? Do you have to
I'm sending them to an
somebody?
appraiser, actually, who's then going to forward them to an auction house, and we're going to see what comes of it. Because, as Bob said, yeah, well, Bob said he thinks the money for me at least is in that the fact that I have absolutely complete sets. Like I have two of the original first issue, and then one of each after that for the original Star Wars. And as I said, I think I told the story before, I met an appraiser on a bike ride randomly, and she said, you don't want to deal with this individually. You might want to find a reputable auction house who would do it on consignment or something like that. So I'm puzzling about that.
You might get $1 million. Right? I don't know. How much were they? Were they worth $1 million?
The top grade versions, like the ones that are ranked by this company called PSA, they, in this article that I found, the combined value of all the cards, I think it was only 8 of them, was about $230,000. So of those cards, I have duplicates of every one, and they're all in great shape. So it would be almost $500,000, I suppose. But again,
my goodness, John.
There's got to be a market for it. Someone wants to have to buy it. It has to be in great shape. I mean, there's a lot of ifs about this.
Well, they're in great shape.
But they might not be perfect, which is out of my control. That's printing and cropping and a whole bunch of other stuff, yeah.
Well, we're all waiting for your
all
payday.
Of us, yes.
For your payday. See what's going on.
All right, Mr. Bennett. Time for the business birthday.
Everyone does celebrity birthday greetings, but the Focus Group is the only show in the universe that celebrates business birthdays.
So born today, well, today's Wednesday, but born today, July 31st, 1911, was Henry Leroy Willson, and Willson is spelled Willson.
I noticed that, and I thought it was a typo, but
yeah, I did too.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's a strange way to spell it. Born July 31st, 1911. He died in 1978 at 67 years old. He's an American Hollywood talent agent, and he was the one who played a very large role in developing the beefcake craze of the 1950s. So he was born
what
into
a perfect birthday, Tim.
Right. He was born into a prominent show business family in Lansdowne, Pennsylvania, which is right outside of Philadelphia. His father was vice president of the Columbia Phonograph Company, and then became president in 1922. They became very close friends with a lot of Broadway theater, opera, and vaudeville performers like Will Rogers and Fanny Brice. And so the family eventually moved out of the Philadelphia suburbs to New York City. And his son Henry, took up an interest in tap dancing, which his father was very upset about. So the father decided to enroll Henry in the Asheville School in North Carolina because it was known for its very rugged weekend activities, such as rock climbing, backpacking, and also many sports. And they thought it would have a positive influence on his son, which certainly did not, because he ended up at the lesbian enclave of Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. And
Wait. The lesbian enclave?
Well, that's what I call it. Wesleyan University.
Okay, yeah.
Right? That's where the lesbians go, right?
I don't know.
A lot of them. So at least that's what my friends say when they tour it now with their kids to go to college. So lots of women there smoking cigarettes, apparently, from what I understand. Anyway,
that's a good one.
He went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut, and he spent his weekends in Manhattan, where he wrote a weekly gossip column for Variety. So the Asheville school did not butch him up as Daddy had wanted. He as he was working for Variety, he ended up traveling to Hollywood on a steamship via the Panama Canal, and of all things, met Bing Crosby and his wife Dixie on the steamship. And then they got him a job at Photoplay, and he wrote an article about Gary Crosby, which was their son. So from there, he ended up getting a job at Hollywood Reporter. He worked. He also worked for an agency, a talent scout agency, which was purchased by his father. And what his father was upset about him being in Hollywood, he would be at Sunset Strip at all the gay bars. And he would often get wooed by the young professionals and so forth. So the father kept trying to, again, find something else for him to do. He ends up eventually, after being part of a number of different talent agencies, he eventually opened his own talent agency where he nurtured the careers of his young finds, frequently coercing them into sexual relationships in exchange for publicity and film roles. So he was written about in a book called Screened Out, Playing Gay in Hollywood from Edison to Stonewall by Richard Barrios.
So Tim, was he gay?
Oh, yes.
Oh, but it wasn't like out there, or was sort of known?
It was known. It was known by those in the know, which is where
wink, wink. Okay.
Yeah, where this is leading. So so they said Henry Willson, who's our business birthday, had a singular knack for discovering and renaming young actors whose visual appeal transcended any lack of ability. So under his tutelage, Robert Mosley became Guy Madison, Orison Whipper became Hungerford Jr. Orison Whipple Hungerford became Ty Hardin. Arthur Galen became Tab Hunter, and Roy Shearer became Rock Hudson.
No.
Sure.
Wow. Okay.
So he successfully was what they termed the beefcake enterprise for talent, and it was so widely recognized that his sexuality, of him being gay, there was concern that it was often because of association, people inaccurately thinking that his clients were all gay. And at one point, there was somebody written a book by Natalie Wood that said some of the would-be actors Willson represented were heterosexual, but a disproportionate number of them were homosexual, bisexual, or, and quote, cooperated with Willson to get their gigs. If a young, handsome actor had Henry Willson as an agent, it was almost assumed in Hollywood that he was gay. His clients included Rock Hudson, Tab Hunter, Chad Everett, Robert Wagner, Nick Adams, Guy Madison, Troy Donahue, Clint Walker, Dak Rambo, I don't know him.
Yeah.
Ty Hardin, John Derek. So he
quite the roster, Tim.
Yeah, so he ends up as I said, having most of this clientele and starting this beefcake, what was known as the beefcake era. He said his most prominent client was Rock Hudson, who he transformed from a clumsy, naive Chicago-born truck driver into Hollywood's most popular leading man. The two were linked professionally until 1966. In 1955, a confidential magazine threatened to publish an expose about Hudson's secret gay life with Willson. But Willson decided to sell them stories and information about Rory Calhoun, his years in prison, and Tab Hunter's arrest at a gay party in 1950 in exchange for not printing the Hudson story. So what Willson then did is urge Hudson to marry his secretary, Phyllis Gates, in order to put the rumors to rest so he can maintain his macho image. Of course, that marriage only lasted 3 years.
Jeez.
They said in later years, Willson struggled with drug addiction, alcoholism, paranoia, and weight problems. His own sexuality had become very widely known in public knowledge, so many of his clients, both gay and straight, decided to distance from him for fear of being branded the same. He died destitute and penniless at the Motion Picture and Television Country House and Hospital from cirrhosis of the liver at 67. It was written about him on his head. He had no money for a headstone. They eventually were able to scrape together some money. The headstone just read star maker, and then somebody had quipped in the press, he was a very, very dangerous man. He controlled all these guys: Rock, Rip, Rap, Tab, Troy. So that was, there was recently a movie made, a Netflix movie, and Jim Parsons played him.
Really? Do you remember what the movie's called?
It's the Netflix miniseries Hollywood. and Jim Parsons plays.
You remember the movie, right?
Henry Willson.
You remember the miniseries?
Yeah.
Did you watch this? I think it came out around the time of the pandemic, like 2020,
it did.
right?
Yeah. Yep. So.
Wow. But, that last part, the slide down, where you said he suffered from depression, a whole bunch of things.
Right.
And then ends up the client's bolt, then he's penniless, and he ends up in some, the home for the wayward, right?
Yeah, they said he was unemployed and destitute. He moved into the motion picture and television country house and hospital until his death from cirrhosis of the liver at 67. He had no money to cover the cost of a gravestone. He was interred in an unmarked grave, and eventually a headstone was placed that just read Star Maker.
Interesting birthday, Tim. Very, because it brings up for me, it brings up a lot of interesting thinking of who you could truly be back then. And I think, again, this is one of those things you and I talked about 1 or 2 weeks ago about this idea of if you were gay in the 50s or 60s, for quite a while, even today, it's problematic. So, wow. And in that world, I just that whole thing you said at the end where he had to do a deal with the magazines to not have Rock Hudson's name dragged through the mud. So instead, hey, let's use this guy.
I'll give you dirt on 2 more.
Yeah.
If you don't run the Rock Hudson story. I'm sure that happens still, though, don't you think?
Yes. And I think that kind of horse trading it's so despicable and weird. The closest thing that I could think about it is today's hunger for news about the royals. The royal press.
Oh, my gosh.
They go to all extremes to get something, something headline worthy, which real, fake, who knows? It's just crazy. Wow. Good one, Tim. Good business birthday.
And Harvey Weinstein, right? I mean, in terms of sleeping,
Yep.
Allegedly, you had to sleep with him, or if you wanted to get the right role, there was a sexual favor involved. Wasn't that what all the allegations were?
Yep.
So this was the same sort of thing. He just did it with men. So.
Boy, oh boy. Yeah, true. All right, moving on. Moving on from there, we have a shop talk for you today, and Tim found the article. It comes to us from Jalopnik magazine, which is basically a car blog, but I love the thing behind this. And many of you may have read or vaguely heard about the International Space Station's longevity, being that I think it's supposed to be in service till like 2030 or a little beyond that, and how NASA is wondering how to decommission the space station, which basically means deorbiting the space station. And they have to deorbit it in such a way that it hits the atmosphere. A lot of it burns up, but major chunks of it would have to fall into one of the oceans. And God help you if you're in a fishing boat in the Pacific or the Atlantic. I mean, they have to figure this. They could figure it out pretty well. But so far, the last article I read, and some of this article talks about this as well, is I think they were even looking at SpaceX to have $1 billion contract to fly something up, mount it to the station, and then boost it down. Because the station basically occupies what we call low Earth orbit. Periodically, it needs to be boosted a little bit higher because there is a bit of friction that the station encounters with Earth's atmosphere that slowly degrades its orbit. So every now and then they have to lift it to a higher orbit. Now, Tim, you suggested this, but what intrigued you about this? Because you're not normally, this is science reality, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's off my radar. But I saw this and it interested me because there were a couple things. One of them is we built this with the Russians, correct?
Yeah, correct.
So, and I thought the Russians were the only ones that actually had, because when we stopped our shuttle program, the Russians were still taking astronauts up and down, weren't they?
They still have launch capability, yeah.
And so then I wondered, did they not think about, this has been up there, 25 years?
Mm-hmm.
Did they not think, eventually this has to come down? It's a 450-ton spacecraft. And I thought, could you just take the people off and leave it? But what you're saying is that eventually it will go out of orbit and crash somewhere. Yeah. Which is, I think, what the Russians would do, is what it sounded like from this article to me, because it doesn't seem like the Russians have any desire to partake in figuring out what to do with this. And as you had mentioned, there were NASA and our space agency is trying to figure out, do you boost it and put it up with other space junk? Do you do a controlled burn? Do you drop it in the South Pacific? But either way, it's going to cost us $1 billion. And I thought, well, where are the Russians on this? Since they seem to be cozying up with the Chinese. And the Chinese are desperately trying to get into space. So that was my thought on this is what if you just got your people out of it and left it and just rolled the dice? Chances are it'll hit the water somewhere, right?
I suppose if you were a betting man, and I bet some of the engineers could actually make those probabilistic projections. NASA's point, though, is that this, because of its scale and weight, it needs to be deorbited. It has to be done not randomly by itself as it slowly decays. They want to be able to do it when they can control it, because you don't want one of these modules landing in a populated area or like our city or something, or on a house or something.
Right, but
So,
if we had, depending upon the administration we had, right? Say you had an administration that just didn't care, because the Russians, because their eyes on the ball with Ukraine, and the U.S.-Russia relationship is
In the
poor
toilet.
at best.
Yeah.
So the Russians don't seem to have any desire to do anything with this, right? I mean, that was kind
Correct.
of the gist of this article. So say we had a new administration that said, Russia, if you don't want to partake in this, we don't either. I guess then it just becomes the U.S. and Russia deciding to just let this thing happen as be, or is $1 billion in the scheme of things for us not a lot of money to make sure this lands safely somewhere?
Someone's going to have to figure it out, and the price tag is what's getting a lot of people up in arms, because there's an
Right.
equal group of people who feel the same way you do, which is if they're ignoring it, we can ignore it too and let the chips fall where they may. But you could just imagine the scenario years from now when this thing finally really scrapes the atmosphere to the point where it's slowing down and then beginning to deorbit itself and burn up, and things like the solar panels, like certain items are just going to totally fry up and not be a problem. But these bigger things would certainly survive re-entry, in my opinion. So
But when they talk
of course,
about the Space Force and such, I mean, do you think is this something that could just blow up, or you can't do that you can't do that?
And if you did
orbit?
it in orbit, you'd have all this debris that would damage other satellites. In fact, I just read, complimentary to this article, I read something the other day where it's getting more and more hazardous to put people up in space because of all the junk that's up there. All the rocket debris, all the satellite debris. I think to your earlier, I would interpret what you were saying, though, is about the Russian being at the table to do this. It's interesting how quickly you could back away from something, right?
Right.
If you're a partner, regardless of what's happening politically, science is science, space is space. If you've a legitimate partner, come to the table and help us figure out how to deorbit it, because you set up this project 25 years ago with us. At least be a good partner and figure out the ending of it. But it's going to fall on us to do it, I suppose.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by our cooperation with the Russians in space, because our relationship on Earth has been unsteady at best over the years. I mean, in my whole life, I don't think we've ever been. Maybe a little bit with Gorbachev, there was some hint of maybe some thawing of relations, but we always seem to have been at odds as an adversarial relationship. And I thought, at least in space, we seem to have some sort of relationship. And the people that are the astronauts up there all say that there's no issues up there.
No.
I don't know.
They're all
maybe someday.
astronauts. Yeah.
Right. So, and the
So to
Russians are
answer-
certainly getting something out of this. But yeah, the reason why I go back to the long way of answering this question is, I was one of those that just thought, well, if the Russians don't care about it, why should we? But
Well, here's a paragraph that answers that perfectly. The other way to bring down the ISS is via an uncontrolled deorbit, which is what I was talking about, which poses a major risk when the ISS breaks up and jettisons parts as it plummets through the atmosphere. The station is bigger than a football field, making it the largest object to deorbit ever. And its orbital trajectory carries the ISS over 90% of the planet's population, so an uncontrolled descent is a risky proposition that could lead to serious injury or even death. Their goal is to controlled deorbit, and it would go into the South Pacific. A lot of good things go into that poor South Pacific, I tell you. But this was interesting to me because, like so many things, even in our personal lives, we start a project, we put resources behind it, and then at some point the project is not as important, or it's outlived itself or whatever, and then it's like, what do you do with something, right?
Right.
This is a prime example of that.
Well,
I
it sounds
wish
like
they should just Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go on.
I wish they would just keep it in orbit. But I suppose what I've read is the components are aging. There's serious damage to some areas from micrometeorites. They're not sure how much longer these things were rated for 15 years or 10 years, and it's been up there 10 years longer than it should have been. So I don't know.
And it seems like our focus is to go back to the moon to start mining minerals on the moon or something. I don't know if you saw that on.
Yep.
Or maybe going to Mars, which is, 9 months to be in the capsule?
Huge amount of time to get there. Lots of radiation. That whole Mars thing, I love the idea, but my God, there's a lot of engineering challenges to face before we ever put a foot on that planet.
Would you go up to the moon?
If space tourism existed, like it does in that show that I love called For All Mankind, I would certainly go to the moon. Yeah, if you could go like you would go to Fiji or something,
right?
I would do it in a second flat. Yeah.
How long does it take to get there?
Moon takes a couple days.
Okay.
The Apollo astronauts did it in, I think it was 2 or 3 days each direction, and they were traveling pretty darn fast when they left orbit. So it's a good clip.
It's like driving to Florida, right?
Without stopping.
Yeah. Well, so stay tuned to the see what happens with the International Space Station. A lot of this stuff doesn't hit the news like it used to in the 60s, I guess. This was always big news about what was going on in space, but it almost seems to be an afterthought. Maybe because we don't have the shuttle anymore. Remember, shuttle became almost routine.
Same with the Apollo program. By the third, fourth, fifth launch, everybody's like moved on, right?
Yeah. So thank you for joining us today here on the Focus Group. We appreciate the time you spend with us. Be sure to learn all about us and find some of our other programming, including the Focus Group and TFG Unbuttoned at focusgroupradio.com. While you're there, you'll see our sponsors in the right-hand margin, including Deep Discount has been with us for quite some time here on the Focus Group. So be sure to click on their logo and start shopping away. We want to remind everybody that in the summer season and all year round, be sure to pay attention on the road. There's a lot of traffic out there, a lot of people traveling as we're in the last month of summer vacations before kids go back to school. So don't text or drive, arrive and live. And we'll see you next time here on the Focus Group.
It's the Focus Group with Tim Bennett and John Nash. Accessible on all platforms. Subscribe, like, and rate us on your platform of choice. Learn more at focusgroupradio.com.
That was a stunning focus group.